Good evening, everyone. Good to be in the house of the Lord. First Baptist Church in Bryant. And for a moment there, I was actually running a little bit late tonight. Pulled up at 6:30, and I didn't see a car one. Keaton was parked out back, so I didn't see his car. And I thought, did I miss the announcement or something? But I'm glad to see all of you here on campus. I know we have some watching us online, and I'm glad that you're with us as well. We go to the life of Paul. The slides are a little bit heavy tonight. I've got 30 slides. I doubt seriously that I will get all 30 done. But you hang on to those. And if they look a little bit different, some of these slides, not all of them, and I always like to share my sources if I use anything. Rose Publishing put out a series of, and they have PowerPoint slides and many different things, a series on the life of Paul. I think you can get that as a DVD or a download probably now. But some of these things, not all the slides, but some of them come from that. And so I want you to be aware with that. And you see the little byline underneath that tells you about that. So I have used that for several times. You remember that too, I am teaching this class at the seminary. We're a little bit further along than we are. Actually, we're about to go with Paul to Rome, so we're all the way at the other end. But we've got just a few weeks left of school. But we're getting started on that. It'll be a little bit different from what I do at school. Sometimes at school I kind of show my homework a little bit more. It gets a little bit tedious, and so probably won't do that. But what we do want to do is we want to follow Paul as he followed Christ. We want to see Paul as that master missionary, that energetic evangelist, that one that went from Jerusalem roundabout to Illyricum. And I told you that I'm fully convinced that Paul is a southern boy, because you don't talk that way unless you're from the South when you say things like "I reckon" and "roundabout." So I know that Paul was a southern boy. In Romans 15:19, he said from Jerusalem roundabout to Illyricum. We looked at that last week. I'm going to back up a little bit this week, and we're going to try to focus on his early life. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's sort of the dates. You understand, when I'm trying to guess, I'm not guessing them. I'm reading people who do. But when you're trying to guess dates that are 2,000 years ago, I mean, the margin of error is about 100 years, not quite that much, but probably 10. And so we don't know for sure. The best guess, or what I have read, the best guess, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. The best guess of when Paul was born is around 5 A.D. Now, I've read 7, I've read 10, I've read 3, I've read a lot. So this is just an average of when Paul was born, 5 A.D. So he is roughly 10 years younger than the Lord Jesus Christ. And I mean that from the Lord's birth. He's quite a bit younger if you start dealing with the Lord's divinity and eternality. But Jesus was born, and then about 10 years later, the Apostle Paul was born. We talked last week, did Paul know Jesus? And I'm fairly convinced that he knew of Jesus. I don't know if he ever spoke to Jesus or was in the audience when Jesus spoke, but I'm pretty sure that Paul would have known of Jesus Christ. And so they were, of course, pretty well contemporaries. Now, Paul was born, you see the little bitty map there, in Tarsus. He calls it no mean city. Tarsus was a big city. It was an important city. obviously, Paul was born to an affluent family, a well-respected family. And you say, why do you say that? Because Paul was born a Roman citizen. He didn't buy his Roman citizenship. He was born that way. And so obviously his family was well respected. They were in the trade of tent making. We will talk more about that. Let me just go ahead and just share a little bit about that. It would better be described, I think, as tapestry making. So it could have been everything from a rug to, yes, a canvas, and many people lived in tents or had them as they journeyed. It could have been sails, as in those flapping things on a boat. Really anything that would have been made of cloth, spun wool or yarn. They had other means of doing that. So Paul was, that was not a, what's the right word? I hate to say it this way, but a low-level trade, like a bricklayer. But it was well respected. And in my journeys over there, we went to Turkey, and I didn't want to buy a rug, like a doormat, from Turkey. So I waited till we got as close as I thought that we would ever get to where the Apostle Paul lived. And I ended up buying a rug, and I paid a lot for it. Up in Philippi, up in the area of Philippi, because that's probably about as close as we would get. And it's not very big, and it was a couple of $100 for that. So, and I know that's today, but still it is a very respected trade. A lot of it is much more decorative than, utilitarian, but it is a very important trade. Okay, all right, I've said enough about that. Go to the next slide. Roman citizen, I'm giving you some verses of Scripture you can look up later. But he was a Roman citizen. He mentions that several times. He appeals his case to Caesar. Paul used his citizenship. Now, there's a lesson for you and me. I don't want to be just historical. Let's get some biblical lessons. Paul used his citizenship, which in turn gives us the lesson that we too can use our citizenship. We are very blessed that we are American citizens, and we have rights in this country that are given to us, and we need to stand up for those rights and insist upon those rights. Paul did that a couple of occasions. One time in Philippi, he really scared those fellows. Another time when he was arrested in Jerusalem, scared those fellows too. He said, "You going to beat a Roman citizen who has not been charged?" Further, Paul appealed his case to Caesar later. So Paul used his Roman citizenship, and we have every right to stand for our rights. Because we are Christian does not mean that we forfeit our rights as U.S. citizens. And we can stand up for those, and we should, and use them for the Lord's benefit as well. He was a student of Gamaliel. You met Gamaliel maybe when we were reading in Acts chapter 5, or you were reading in Acts chapter 5, and Gamaliel shows up. And we'll talk a little bit more about him, but he was a well-respected teacher in Jerusalem. Well-respected teacher. In fact, for Paul to say in Acts chapter 22, student of Gamaliel, he would have not said that if it were not a badge of honor per se. So we'll look a little more about him a little bit later. Member of the strictest Jewish sect called a Pharisee. He was the son of a Pharisee. As we think, and it's really hard, as we went through the Gospels and we saw all of the legalism and bad attitudes of the Pharisees, that's who Paul was. When the Lord chastised those Pharisees, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites in Matthew 23, he was talking about Paul and his father. Hard to think about, isn't it? Because we so know Paul as that one who was saved on the Damascus Road and became the great missionary. Well, I think it's important for us to see him prior to that. The first mention of him is in Acts chapter 7 and verse 58. You probably remember what was going on. They were killing Stephen. Let's just say what it was. It was murder. They were murdering Stephen. Stoning, but it was not any type of legal, official stoning that had taken its legal route through the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin didn't have the rights under Roman rule to execute. We saw that in the Lord's life. But they were murdering Stephen. It was a mob of Jews. And it says there that this young man named Saul in Acts 7:58 was guarding the cloaks. And there's just something about that phrase that never sat well with me. It was just kind of like, what was he doing? Just, here, I'll hold the coats. That doesn't seem, I cannot, for the life of me, find any kind of good evidence. I want to think it was some kind of show of honor, or we're doing this for you, Paul. I just don't know. I don't know. But what I would say is that something happened there two different ways. It seemed that on one side of Paul's life, this was, how do you say, the gasoline that fueled his fire. When he watched this with Stephen, there was just something about it that just fueled his fire. Now, well, let me say the other side. So that's one side. The other side that never left Paul's heart. After he was converted, we'll visit this later. After he was converted, and his first trip back to Jerusalem, the Bible tells us that he was in a trance. I think Paul was meditating. I think obviously he was praying, and he was meditating, and he was agonizing. And the Lord showed up and said, Paul, they're not going to hear you in Jerusalem. You might as well pack your bags, because I'm sending you to the Gentiles. And Paul just, I can hear it in his voice. He said, but Lord, they know that I was a church persecutor. And I was there when they stoned Stephen. And he agonized over that. So on one side, it fueled his fire. On the other side, it convicted him heavily. Maybe it was the conviction. Let me read some couple of verses of Scripture in Acts chapter 7 and 8, actually chapter 8. The first mention of him, it says And the witnesses laid down their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. The next mention of Saul is in chapter 8. Now listen to this. Now Saul was consenting to his death. At that time, a great persecution arose against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the region of Judea, Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men carried Stephen. Let's skip to verse 3. That's what I'm trying to get at. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church. And that word havoc is a word that was used to describe the mess that is left after a battle. So Paul went to battle with the church, and in his tailwind was left havoc. He made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. Now let me read another verse. Chapter 9. Then Saul, verse 1, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Now, is that not language that you can feel? I mean, I can almost see Paul just breathing threats. I mean, it was just, he was eat up with it. I mean, just absolutely eat up with killing Christians. Now, I think the Lord's conviction was working here. Sometimes God's greatest enemies are the people who are so under conviction. You think about that, and maybe you have somebody in your life that is so anti-God, anti-Christian, and so vehement about it, and so unkind and mean-spirited about it. It might very likely be that they are under the heavy weight of conviction. And it might be that our prayer should be that they would finally let that conviction break their hearts and fall before the Lord and seek Him in salvation. I know it's hard to pray for our enemies, but it is important. And we have seen, like the Apostle Paul, I mean, he was making havoc of the church, and he was breathing threats in chapter 9 when he went. All right, next slide. Where am I at on time? Okay, we're doing fine. Well, let's talk just a little bit more about the city of Tarsus. I'm in slide number 5, the city of Tarsus. So Paul said, I am a Jew in Acts 21 in verse 39, he says, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city. I'm glad I'm not a citizen of a mean city. I'd like to be a citizen of a nice city. That's not what that word means. Mean means low class. It means like low class, average. Tarsus was the capital city of the Roman province of Cilicia. This is a little Bible geography lesson here. You always hear city Tarsus, then you hear like Cilicia and Pamphylia and Asia and Galatia. Those are regions. And just like we have states, they would have capitals, like we have Little Rock, Arkansas. Well, Tarsus was the capital of the Roman province of Cilicia. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So, second only to Athens in the field of philosophy. When I found that out, I actually confirmed it by 2 different sources, and I was like, really? That's interesting. I've never been to Tarsus. It's a long ways from where I was over in Greece. If you're in Jerusalem, it's going to be a long ways to Tarsus. Tarsus is up on that northern rim, getting into Asia, moving into Asia. It was very much heavily populated by the Jews. And as I understand, there was a, can I say middle class? There was a large amount of Jewish people who were skilled tradespeople, and they did very well. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is Tarsus is almost the first stop before you get to Ephesus on the Roman road. It also was on the sea, and this, pronounce this right, Cydnus River, the Cydnus River. I think, do I have a map? Next slide. Yes. I don't know how well you can see that. But you see Tarsus on the northern rim, sort of north and east of Cyprus. You're really getting into what is considered Asia. And it is Turkey today. And this is modern Turkey. The other picture that you see is a picture of some of the antiquities of Tarsus. Now, I've told you, as I show you pictures through these lessons, I learned something very important. Very important. If you ever travel to Rome or Greece or Jerusalem, never call these old relics ruins. Oh, no, you will get slapped in the mouth. They are antiquities. All right? So you just learned that. We don't call them ruins. They're not ruined. They're called antiquities. We were taught that very first day. Do not, and you're walking about, say, oh my goodness, look at all these gorgeous ruins. People will frown on you. So another thing about this picture I think is very important. Look how wide the street is. This is one way that they guesstimate population. Makes sense. Where I grew up on Conway Wilson Road, and I didn't live in town. We lived on a gravel road that dead-end at one of our neighbors. And then you have the illustrious I-30 Speedway interstate, right? It doesn't take a rocket scientist just say that people are looking at our civilization 2,000-3,000 years later, and they find this little pig trail called Conway Wilson Road, or they think they have, and they say there weren't very many people that lived here. And then they see I-30 and they say, oh, there were lots of people that lived here. It's the same at this time. And Tarsus does have very wide streets, as well as Ephesus. We don't know exactly how many, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150,000 has been the guess. Whereas in Athens, we are only talking about 200 to 300,000 in Paul's day. So this is no mean city. That's what Paul wanted people to know. Okay, all right, moving on. Go right ahead. Another thing about Tarsus was it's a very commercial city. And Paul grew up a Jew learning to deal with Gentiles. How many of you can look backwards on your life and see God's hand of preparation? Well, about 5 or 6 of us. So all the rest of you weren't thinking. Can you? I'm just let you think on that for a moment. Can you see how God tailored you and molded you to become who you are and to do for Him what He wanted you to do? Can't you see that? Same with Paul. Paul was a tent maker who learned to deal with Gentiles very early in his life. He understood the separation between the two cultures. Now, the Jews may not want to touch a Gentile. This may be a bad joke, but they didn't mind at all touching Gentile money. And Paul, being a tent maker, probably apprenticing through his father, would have learned to deal in a Gentile culture, being a Jew. Can you see how that makes a huge, how important that preparation is? Here Paul, the strict Jew, but he was going to take the gospel to the Gentiles. He learned that as a tent maker living in Tarsus. Son of a Pharisee. I actually use the New Living Translation here. I just like the wording. Son of a Pharisee, lived as a strict Pharisee. Listen to the description of himself in Philippians 3:5. I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I am a pure-blooded citizen of Israel. Salute. And a member of the tribe of Benjamin, and his name happened to be Saul. Now, what other famous character from the tribe of Benjamin was named Saul? King Saul. I think Saul of Tarsus might have been named after or in honor of King Saul. Pretty good guess. A real Hebrew, if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Pharisees. A group of Jewish religious leaders who believed a person must keep every one of the traditions of Judaism as well as the biblical commands. Now listen to that. Traditions of Judaism and the biblical commands. And there were lots of traditions, lots of them. Next slide. Pharisees were highly respected for their knowledge of the Torah and all the Old Testament scriptures. Now, this does not come through in the Bible very well. The Sadducees outnumbered the Pharisees. The Sadducees were the very liberal. I say very liberal. They were the liberal Jewish political group. The Pharisees were the ultra-conservatives. They wished there was lots of writing among Pharisees around the time of Paul that had been discovered. They prayed for and wished for the day that God would turn Israel back to the heydays of King David. The Sadducees were more progressive, and they said, we've got a good Roman deal, so let's just be good Roman citizens and move on. We'll keep our religion and temple and all that kind of good stuff, but let's just move forward. All of your high priests and many of your lesser priests were Sadducees. What most of your Pharisees were scribes. That's why we often hear scribes and Pharisees. And teachers. They were teachers of the law. I think Paul was headed toward a career as a Pharisaical rabbi. A Pharisaic rabbi. That's what he was going to be. Now, he said that I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries. Next one. I mentioned this. Let me go over and just give you a taste of some of the things that Jesus said about these Pharisees. My fingers don't work. I'll get it in just a minute. Okay, I'm going to just kind of hop, skip, and jump, so bear with me. Matthew 23. Did I tell y'all that's where I was going? I'm going to hop, skip, and jump. So this is the woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. I will pick up with verse 13. But woe to you, scribes, and Pharisees, and hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourself, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. They are actually anti-evangelistic. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, you devour widows' houses, and for pretense you make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. What does he mean, devour widows' houses? I need that temple tax. We need to make sure that we're giving our tithes. Widows, did they have any kind of income? Only the care of their family. Or later, there were some widows, such as we met one named Anna, and she stayed around the temple. But not every widow had that ability. If your family didn't take care of you, then you starved. But that didn't matter. The Pharisees said, you need to give your offering. You'll receive greater condemnation. You travel, verse 15, you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself. Jesus, watch your tongue. He's not being very nice, is he? Jesus, some of the harshest words of Jesus Christ were pointed at the Pharisees. What does this mean? The Pharisees did believe that you could, quote, convert to Judaism, but you had to become a Jew. In every sense of the word. You had to be circumcised if you were a male. You had to dress like them. You had to cut your hair like they did. You had to wear head coverings, ladies, or not wear head coverings, men. You had to pray at certain times. You had to go to the temple at certain times. They had it mapped out. You couldn't do much of anything on the Sabbath. And that's what it meant to become a Jew. It never meant believe. It never meant, well, I shouldn't say this. I'm trying to give a feel for what the Pharisees believed. I mean, the best way to say it is they believed that they found favor with God by accomplishing works, doing, quote, good works. And I say, quote, good works because some of their works weren't very good. But that's what they believed. I have a hard time wrapping my head around them. They would have never, this is why Paul wrote Romans. This is why Paul wrote Galatians. Because the idea that you could be saved simply by faith was like saying that you and I can go to the moon this evening. It was so foreign to them. Okay, but verse 19, fools and blind. For which is greater? This is talking about their swearing. Skip down a little bit. Verse 23, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You pay tithes of mints and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. I mean, they paid big bucks. But they never touched justice, mercy, and faith. Verse 25, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside are full of extortion and self-indulgence. What's extortion mean? Stealing from others with a sleight of hand. I don't know this, but there is suggestion that some of these Pharisees may have had their hand in the offering plate. Extortion. Self-indulgence, what does that mean? Selfishness. I mean, all of this that you do is not about God. It's about you. We can get that way, can't we? Well, this is who Paul was. This is how he grew up. This is what he understood. He was not just a middle-of-the-roader kind of guy. Lives in a quiet neighborhood and you never know he's there. That is not who Paul was. Paul was a leader. He was up front. He was the one leading the pack, as we say, to kill Christians. It is the Pharisees that led the bandwagon to kill Jesus. I can't tell you at all, and be honest, that Paul was there. It was Passover, and knowing Paul like I think I know Paul, why, he wouldn't miss a Passover any more than you and I would miss the Razorbacks playing on Friday night. Paul could have been there the week Jesus was crucified. I don't know this for sure, but Paul could have been. He would have been a young man in that crowd crying out, "Crucify him, crucify him." I don't know that for sure, but I know that's what Paul would have been crying if he would have been there. I'm looking at my here forward. I actually had intentions of getting to 20. Yep, this is a good place to stop. So we will start with slide number 12. Is that right, Ainsley? Slide number 12 next time? All right. I rambled a little bit. Forgive me for that. We will pick it up next week, and Lord willing, and continue with our study of the life of Paul, his early life. What was going on with Paul in his early life? Okay, let us mention a few announcements and prayer requests. There is a table shower that is going on for David Ray and Catherine McDonald, and they are getting married. Forgive me for not remembering the date, but there is some information out there on that table shower where you can get the information on that date. So just be in mind of that. This coming Sunday, after the morning service, the deacons will meet in the fellowship hall. Sunday, April the 4th, we will have that's Easter Sunday. We will have a sunrise service here at the church, out in the parking lot. Here's how you bring your own chair. So it's a bring your own chair event. And we all just kind of sit out there. You don't have to dress up. You get up at 6:30, you come out. We have a very short service about the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. And then we will have our regular morning worship service at 10:45. On April the 11th, a week later, our intent is to begin Sunday school for all ages. For all ages. And our adults will meet in the auditorium so that we can space out and those kind of things. And we will continue a teacher rotation system for a while. So that's April the 11th. So just be in mind of that. Okay, any other announcements that I missed? Then thank you to our online audience tonight. God bless you, and hope to see you Sunday. And we will begin prayer requests at this time. Let me remind you, if you have a prayer concern that you would like to share with the church family, you can send it to me or Dee, our secretary. Our emails you can find at our website. You can always text us if you have our cell phone numbers. And we want to share those with our church family if you have them. So let us know. God bless you.